This is James Corbett, and you're tuned into CorbettReport.com on this 15th day of July 2010. Today I'm happy to welcome back to the program Daniel Estulin, the researcher and writer behind the international best-selling true story of the Bilderberg Group, and the recently published Shadow Masters, which are both available from Trine Day. Daniel Estulin, it's an honor to have you back on the program. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me again in your show, James.
Well, it's excellent for you to be here, and it's been about a month and a half since we last talked back at the end of May when you were revealing this year's Bilderberg agenda, and a lot of things have transpired since then, not least of which was, of course, the conference itself. But perhaps we should hear a little bit about your address to European Parliament, what transpired there, and how your speech was received.
It was actually received very, very well. It took place on the 1st of June, a historic event, I think, unprecedented by any standard. Just imagine me standing up in front of the joint session of Congress in the United States and making a speech on the Bilderberg Group. I think, I'll be long dead and buried before that happens. But certainly the speech itself for the European Parliament was very, very well received. I was given about 25 minutes to speak, and the room was full of about 220 people. There were 50 media representatives from 37 countries. It's, again, an unprecedented event. The speech itself can be downloaded from my website, danielestulin.com. I talked about the future of European stability, the idea of what, the Bilderberg concept of not so much one world government, as you and I have often talked about, rather one world company limited, and towards that one world company limited, and how that, the financial and the global economic impetus is actually being driven by the forces which we don't usually see on television or in the mainstream press. And I put it all in perspective against this background of what's happening in the world today. And again, on the stage, I was presented by Mario Borghesio, a senior-most representative of European Liga Norte from Italy, and also on stage with me sat the representatives of UKIP, British Independent Party, whose leader, Nigel Farage, unfortunately couldn't make it because he was still recovering from a tragic but not fatal, luckily, airplane crash.
That's right, absolutely, and I hope people will go to your site, danielestulin.com, to check out that speech in its entirety. But right now, I guess we should get to the conference itself, and I note a report on danielestulin.com in which you note that a befitting headline for this year's conference would be, "The World is Out of Time-Outs." Explain what you mean by that.
Well, exactly. From the Chinese real estate bubble about to blow, as I said to you a month and a half ago when we talked, to an imminent housing crash in Canada, from the more than expected treasury bubble collapse in the United States, and also to the meltdown in Spain, which is happening as we speak, Greece, Hungary, Portugal, Ireland, Iceland, Italy. The battle lines are being drawn, and needless to say, these battle lines will very much define how humanity, which direction it will actually go over the next few years. Greece, needless to say, was obviously on everyone's mind. But before we actually go to Greece, let's talk a little bit about the United States. In the last few days, again, if you look at the situation in the United States, it's tragic to say the least. The sales of new houses fell about 33% on an annual rate, adjusted seasonally to about 300,000 units. Now, this is the lowest number ever registered. The consumer's confidence fell to just under 53 points in June from 62.7 in May. And, the Dallas Fed's gauge of manufacturing activity dropped to minus 4% from 2.9%. The Richmond Fed's index fell to 23 from 26. The Philadelphia Fed index fell as well. The Chicago Fed fell. The message here is, and this is again one of the Bilderbergers' main concern, I didn't quite understand from our sources inside what they were talking about until actually I looked into the numbers myself. The message is it's not some isolated regional downturn. It's one that's spreading to every corner of the United States. Now, the Economic Cycle Research Institute's weekly leading index is falling off the cliff. Its growth rate just fell to a negative 6.9%, and that's the worst reading in a year, and by far below the high positive of 28.5% way back in October. Now, the last time this index tanked as much, recession struck within a few months, and, what's even worse is that consumer credit in the United States, car loans, credit cards, it shrunk by a massive $9.1 billion in May. That's on top of almost $15 billion decline in April. And that May slump was 4 times as large as the economists were expecting. So the bottom line is, it's time to brace ourselves for a massive stock decline and a powerful double-dip recession, which is coming towards us, with the speed of a tsunami. And that's all the things that the Bilderbergers were talking about. Again, information we get from our sources because, again, as I explained to you before, you don't have 120 Bilderberg members meeting all at the same time in one room. They break up into groups of about 20 people and then look at a particular problem from different perspectives, which is why at times it takes a little bit of, of putting the pieces of the puzzle together, because, we'll get a little bit of information from one of our sources at one of these groups, and then we get another piece of information from somebody else, who are sitting in another group with another 20 people looking at the same problem from a different perspective. And then what they do is, they meet in the afternoon, they actually look at the different ideas and brainstorming ideas, and they actually put together a common policy. So, but again, the numbers are scary. And what they're telling us is that despite, the biggest economic stimulus package in the United States history, despite near 0% interest rates from the Federal Reserve, despite the biggest bank bailout on record and the government takeover of every company from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to General Motors, AIG, the economy is sinking yet again, and not only in the United States, but also again in Spain, in Portugal, in Greece, in Italy, in Ireland. What was previously merely the risk of a double-dip recession, as the Bilderbergers themselves have admitted, is fast on its way to becoming a reality. And what's worse, it's happening at the same time as the sovereign debt crisis is gathering steam. The bought and paid for economic recovery, as one of the European Bilderbergers said at the meeting in June in Sitges in Barcelona, is coming to a close. It's time instead to deal with a very sobering new reality. Again, the double dip is here with all the attendant consequences for stocks, currencies, commodities, people, needless to say, nation-state republics, and the continent of Europe itself.
That's absolutely right, and this is the absolutely perfectly predictable result of the policy of stimulus that was holding sway over the G20 countries over the past couple of years, and now, of course, they've pulled the rug out on that, and they're switching over to the age of painful austerity, and we had further vindication of that, the fact that things are heading in that direction from this year's G20. So break down in a little bit more detail. You're right there in the belly of the beast in Spain that's falling apart as we speak, and you talk about Canadian housing collapse and other things. Tell us about some of the details.
Well, I'd like to start with Greece, because that's a perfect example. It's something that everybody understands, or at least knows about or heard of, from watching television or reading the mainstream publications. A violent, again, sovereign debt contagion is spreading like wildfire throughout the Eurozone. But as one Bilderberger admitted, if the Greeks get bailed out, then who's next? And where the heck is all the bailout money going to come from? Now, the policymakers may need to come up with almost $800 billion to save these struggling economies. Actually, these numbers have just been adjusted to over $1.2 trillion. Spain's hole is bigger than any black hole known, in the universe. And as the problem, said one French Bilderberg, is that nobody has that kind of money laying around, so it'll have to be borrowed. And if it has to be borrowed from a European bond market that's already falling apart at the seams, what's likely to happen? And of course, all agreed that even more selling, which would drive bond prices down and interest rates up. Also, the newly anointed Tsar of Europe, Herman van Rompuy and company, they got away with a very illegal operation in Greece when the European Community approved this bailout of a Euro member state, which is a breach, of course, of the monetary union's guiding principles, according to the 1992 Maastricht Treaty. But, needless to say, they won't be able to do this again, because everyone is onto them. And most of all, again, the people who've been supporting and sponsoring me at the European Parliament, Borghesio and his Liga Norte, who have been after Barroso, who have been after Van Rompuy to explain their participation at the Bilderberg conference. And to this point in time, none of them have actually come out and publicly stated whether they attended this year's conference or not. Still, the question remains, and it remains not only on our minds, but also on the minds of the Bilderbergers. Will the Eurozone survive, as, you and I talked before the conference, and as they discussed during the conference? And as one Bilderberger asked, there are several strategies on the table. Now, one of these strategies would force weaker, financially challenged members to temporarily forfeit the European membership. Again, as you and I talked before the Bilderberger meeting, because as one German Bilderberger pointed out, that if it becomes obvious that a Greek euro is not monetarily equal to a German euro, which needless to say it is not, then the monetary union cannot survive. And the Germans and the French and the Dutch, they put in a lot of stock over the last 50 years plus to actually get this, economic union to actually work, and they won't stand, for, deadbeat members such as Spain and Portugal and Italy and Greece, pigs, as they call it. That's a nice way to call your member state, to actually stand in the way of getting their, supra-international one world company limited.